Hey everybody, welcome back. This is episode 2 in reading and reacting to the foundation. And I'm going to try something a little bit different for this episode. We're going to look at how the psychohistory of the foundation, which predicted the fall of an empire that had existed for thousands of years, could be used to actually predict our own future. And we're going to kind of do that by going back and looking at empires of our past. Right now, there are no empires around the world. There are superpowers, but really no single nation that's in control of vast swaths of the world. And there were a lot of reasons for that. So just to briefly recap, let's remember that Harry Seldon in the Foundation told the emperor of this vast galactic empire that controlled thousands of systems and had been so successful for thousands of years was going to collapse. And there would be endless war, there would be barbarism, and thousands of more years before another empire might rise. He created the Foundation, 2 of them, on opposite ends of the galaxy in the hope of keeping the collected information of humanity in one place so that the time frame for the empire's collapse could be shortened and a new empire could form within about 1,000 years. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the really fun empires in humanity's past and remind ourselves of why they didn't work, even though at the time they seemed like they might last forever. So let's start with Rome, maybe the most famous of all the empires. It was a vast empire that covered most of Europe and the Mediterranean and northern Africa, which, we're going back plus 2,000 years, so that would have been an incredible expanse for that time. And Rome was basically the capital of the world. It was the glory of the world at its peak. So what happened? How was it that over time this empire shrank down to nothing? Well, there are a number of factors that played into it, and strangely enough, the same factors that played in its downfall also played into later empires' downfall. So money is one. If you're going to expand, you need vast armies. You need money to feed and transport these armies. You need roads. You need potentially ships, depending upon where you're going to go. This stuff all costs money. And then once you have gained the ground, you must hold the ground. Well, if you are in an area where the locals, the indigenous people, are quite primitive compared to you who don't have your mighty military resources, you might be able to hold on for a while. And if you've conquered areas that have great mineral wealth, you may be able to use that to your advantage. Now, the Roman Empire made also great use of slave labor, and this over time actually came to bite them in the butt. But there were a number of other factors that are going to bring down pretty much any empire. And again, it starts with money. If you're in Rome and you're at the heart of the world, you're craving power. You're loving power, and wealth is going to be amassed. Power is going to be amassed. And guess what? You're going to become corrupt. The system itself is going to become corrupt. And Rome went through a period of more than 20 emperors in a span of less than 70 years at one point. The incredible turnover, often by assassination, which really kind of eroded their ability to maintain control over this vast expanse. Now, of course, then there's pushback. You have peoples from all areas who have decided, you know what? Maybe we've had enough of you, and we're going to fight back. And then, of course, there were other empires coming in as well during that time. Another issue that occurred with the Roman Empire was, in order to maintain control of these vast regions, they had to hire locals in order to police these regions. They simply did not have enough Roman centurions to always handle the job. And so you employ locals, and that's great, But the locals are going to have kind of a divided loyalty here. They're not Romans, and quite frankly, if they see what you're doing to their land, that may not last for the long term. And so ultimately, the encroachment of other rising powers, other empires, the fact that it was just way too expensive to continue to maintain this empire, and the corruption in Rome itself ultimately led to its dissolution. In fairness, this did last for many, many centuries. They did probably about as good a job as any empire, but very different times. And the peoples they conquered really initially did not have any opportunity to fight back. But their demise was inevitable. It was just a very slow burn. Now, if you move forward, some of the great European empires, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, these were vast as well. In fact, take a look at this map in the 18th century that shows you the amount of the world that was controlled by various empires. You recall that there was a phrase that the sun never sets on the British Empire, as they had holdings all around the world. But also note on this map just how small Britain is. And it's kind of interesting that you have these powers, and if you go down to Spain and to Portugal right next to it, you see very tiny countries who were ruling from afar. And they're going to therefore run into the very same issues that the Romans did. One, this is an expensive proposition, and especially if you have entities overseas. So now shipping becomes a vital interest. That's very expensive. It's a very time-consuming process to get from place to place. And then, of course, there's the issue of maintaining control over the indigenous peoples. And there's only but so many guns you can have available when before the locals began to fight back. I'm especially interested here in looking at this map of the Spanish Empire at its peak in the 16th century. You'll see Spain very tiny there near the middle of the map, and look at their holdings, especially on the western side of the Americas. It's quite remarkable what was achieved in that time period, but keep in mind also the people that they were controlling were basically Iron Age. They didn't really have the kind of weapons to compete, and also, as we now know, a lot of these folks were basically exterminated by disease that the Europeans brought to the Americas. So there really wasn't a whole lot of opposition. But there was mineral wealth available in many of these areas, still incredibly expensive to hold these positions. In time, that expense combined with the inevitable pushback and competition with other empires, other competing European forces primarily, did lead to the withdrawal of many of the Spanish forces from these areas. Now, this is an oversimplification because it did happen over a period of generations. Changing values also tends to play a role in an empire as well, and its fate. As I talked about the Roman Empire, there was this incredible loyalty and almost sense of awe to Rome. They were this incredible power that really you just didn't feel you had any hope against. But as you move forward in history, and particularly with the British Empire, moving into the 20th century, mass communication creates a world of ideas. People are more informed. People people are more educated, and particularly when we talk about the indigenous peoples around the world. And then there were World Wars I and II, which significantly reduced the British Empire's role in the world. Again, the expense factor was enormous, and also changing values in terms of how people thought about war, even in the home countries. Britain suffered devastating losses of a generation of men during World War I, which really kind of crippled this grand worldview of the glory of conquest and imperialism and kind of changed our perspectives. I don't think today an empire really could work. The world is simply too evolved and too interconnected, the internet and social media in particular, and locals simply are not going to be as welcoming or simply accepting of foreign powers. So the upshot of this is, if you had a Harry Seldon type living at the height of any of these empires of our past, he could have looked at all of the elements around him, looked at the historical trends to that point, and probably been able to calculate that despite the prevailing opinions, that the empires simply were not going to last. They were overextended, they were corrupt, there was a vast wealth inequality, money, 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 money. So much of it coming back to money, 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 money. And that in the end, collapse was inevitable. So in the next video, I'm going to just go back to doing some fun things. We're going to look at Foundation, the book, versus the upcoming series and what we know about that series, and kind of talk a little bit about what I'd like to see and what I think we might see. Not that there's really much of a way for me to know any of that at this point. So I hope you'll be back for video episode number 3 in Read and React, the Foundation.